with us in that. But again, please fill that out or reach out to us ahead of time because we've got some paperwork and some things. Not a lot. Paperwork sounds like a lot. Just we want to get your story and check in with you and see where you're at on your journey. And that's pretty much it. We're going to show the bumper and then we're going to hear from Eric on the teaching.
Well, good morning again, Cypress. Good morning. It is so good to see you, and happy Labor Day weekend. And so thankful that you decided to include us in your holiday plans, and very, very glad that you're here. This is our third and final week in this series called Getting Traction. And over the past few weeks, we've just been talking about this reality that all of us find ourselves at some point in our faith journey just feeling stuck. In fact, we will find ourselves in these moments, or maybe in even seasons, where it just feels like our wheels are spinning and we just can't get any traction. And so over the past few weeks, we've been talking about these core commitments that we believe will help give us the traction that we need to drive our faith forward. And we've looked at two of these already. There's three of them, so we're going to look at the third one a little later on. But maybe just as a little refresher for those who might need it, or if you missed one or both of these, here they are. First of all, in week one, we looked at core commitment number one, which is to pursue Jesus together through regular Sunday engagement. And then last week, we looked at core commitment two, practice the way of Jesus together through life-on-life relationships and serving others. Now, you might have noticed this common thread or this theme that's woven through each of these statements, and I'll give you a hint. It's not Jesus, even though that's usually the right answer, and of course, he is at the center of this. That kind of goes without saying. But the common thread in both of those statements is that we do this together. It's this word together. And I've really been kind of hammering this point for the past 2 weeks. And I really believe this is so important because the reality is that going alone, we've been saying this both the last 2 weeks, going alone or on our own just doesn't get us very far. And so traction in our faith means going together. In fact, it also means working together. Now, this actually kind of brought to mind an experience that Amanda and I had a few years ago on a visit to Mackinac Island. And I don't know if you've ever been to Mackinac, if you know much about it, but for those who are familiar, you might know that there's like this rule, this policy that there's no motorized vehicles allowed anywhere on the island, with very few exceptions, right? And so really your only modes of transportation once you get there, if you're not going to walk, is either like horse and buggy or bicycles. Right, so Amanda and I decided we wanted to rent bikes that day, and we get to the rental shop and we saw a tandem bike, and we thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to ride a tandem bike all over Mackinac Island? You know, and it seemed like a really good idea at the time. But how many of you, I'm curious, have ever ridden a tandem bike with your spouse or anyone really for that matter? So you kind of know, you know what I'm talking about, right? We had never done this. Your hands lifted high, I see it, man. One and only time, right? Yeah, so this was our first time, and we thought it'll be easy. It's like riding a bike. You just hop on and you pedal and away you go. Well, it didn't work like that, you know, for us, because we hopped on the bike and Amanda wanted to get on the back seat, so I got on the front seat. And I don't even know what happened at that point, but it felt like it was our very first time on a bike. You know, like we were all over the street, like wobbling back and forth, just trying to keep the thing from falling over. And then when we finally did get moving and we were kind of going more or less in a straight line, and trying to turn, it was like disorienting, trying to get it to go in the right direction, you know, where we wanted it to go. It just felt weird, you know, and for Amanda, actually, it was kind of terrifying because once we did kind of get this figured out and we were starting to move up down the street and I was getting a little more confident, I started like weaving in and out of other groups of people like walking or riding bikes. But Amanda had no idea what was happening or where we were going because she couldn't see anything. And so while I'm like making all these sudden turns and sudden movements with no warning whatsoever, you know, Amanda had a few choice words for me in those moments. She was not real happy with me, and she made sure I knew that. But we finally did. I mean, we figured it out, and we ended up having a really good time on that tandem bike, just riding around the island that day. But looking back on that, I mean, really, this whole experience was like an exercise in partnership. Right? It was like we had to learn how to work together in tandem with each other, right? Which is, I think, what the whole point of that whole phrase is. And so, it was. In fact, here I'll say this: I really believe that every married couple should have this experience on a tandem bike with each other at one point. And I will admit that it almost ended our marriage, maybe in more than one way. But ultimately, it was a great lesson on just learning to trust each other and communicate and really partnership, right? But before we got there, it really was. I mean, it was clumsy and it was awkward and even it was frustrating and even scary at different times. And we struggled at first. And there was a minute where it felt like we were stuck with this tandem bike that just wasn't going to get us where we wanted to go. And I share that story with you this morning because it really sets up a few things that I want to talk about with you. And somewhere in there, I think, is a metaphor that can maybe help us understand our point of struggle in our faith journey. Because maybe for some of us, what's got us feeling stuck is that we're not always sure what to do with our faith. Like, what do we do with this? And where I'm going with this is that ultimately, as we look at the teachings of Scripture, we understand that what we do with our faith is we share it with others. And really what we're talking about with this is one of the practices of Jesus that we talk about as the practice of witness, or maybe you just heard it referred to as witnessing. Which is really, when you're witnessing, I mean, you're really just talking about something you've seen or something you know or something you've experienced. But for a lot of us, the idea of witnessing in this way or sharing our faith, it can feel a lot harder than it sounds. And maybe for a lot of us, I mean, and I think this would be true on both sides of the conversation. Like if you're the one sharing or if you're the one that's being shared with, I think a lot of times this can feel awkward. Like for a lot of people, the thought of bringing up someone's religion in a conversation is on par with talking about politics, right? And we just don't go there. And so often, again, for many of us, any attempt that we've made to do this just comes off feeling clumsy and maybe even cringy. And immediately for me, I mean, the worst case scenarios come to mind. And maybe you've encountered this before, the mob of Christians on a street corner who are, quote, sharing the gospel, and they've got what look like these picketing signs, and the messages on these signs are kind of this odd mix of Jesus loves you right next to these kind of harsh warnings about the fires of hell, and someone's on a bullhorn. It always seems that someone's got a bullhorn and they're yelling stuff on the bullhorn, and they maybe got salvation tracts that they're handing out as people walk by. And I really want to believe, the handful of times that I've seen this kind of thing or something like it, I want to believe that intentions are true and hearts are in the right place. But as often as I've seen this, I just wonder, and I'm just asking the question, like, is this really bringing people closer to God? Like anyone? Or could it actually be pushing people further away? And I don't know, but I have my suspicions on that one. But that's one approach maybe you've come across. Maybe there's another approach, and anyone who's grown up in the church like I have, maybe you can relate to this. But I remember in the youth groups that I grew up and I was a part of, like in the early to mid '90s, or even when I was in Bible college as a college student, I remember like through the mid to late '90s. It seemed like the real test of faith and whether or not you were a serious Christian was how well you could walk up to a total stranger out somewhere in public and just randomly engage them in a spiritual conversation and lead them to Jesus. Right? And we were even taught like a strategy on how to do this. And usually it involved kind of this 1-2 punch combo, right? Because you'd walk up to a total stranger out of nowhere and just kind of hit them with this innocent and disarming question about the weather or the time or like where they got their shoes. But then you'd follow that with this really pointed question about their eternal destiny, And for those who were like really spiritually mature people in those groups that I was a part of, I mean, this was how you spent your Friday nights. It was like, hey, we're going to go to the mall and we're going to witness. Let's go, and I was always like, I'd rather not, Can we just not, And I'm trying not to be too cynical with this, but for me, I just always hated this approach because it just always felt so unnatural to me, so forced, and to be honest, it was intimidating. Because I mean, what if I walk up to someone and I say the wrong thing, or I don't know the answers to the questions they're asking? Or what if I walk up to somebody and they know more Bible than I do, and now I feel like an idiot, Or what if they just laugh in my face and I just don't think I could handle that kind of rejection? And that's, how I really felt in that moment and in that experience, and maybe you did too. But I just wonder if at some point we've made this into something that's a lot harder than it needs to be. Years ago, I came across this quote that I think just brings us back to what sharing our faith is really all about. And I've got this quote on the screens for us. It says, "Christianity is one beggar telling another beggar where he found bread." I mean, think about that. Yeah, think about that. If you're a starving beggar, that's really good news. You found bread. That's life-changing, that's life-giving news. And so why wouldn't we want to share with someone something that could change their life like it's changed our life? The problem, I think, could be that maybe at times we've been taught maybe a wrong approach. We've taken a wrong approach. Maybe it's not supposed to be picketing and bullhorns. Maybe it's something a lot simpler than that, something a lot more natural. And I believe the real difference maker comes down to just one thing. And we've been talking about it through the entire series. And it's relationship. In fact, I think a better way to describe it is partnership. And this really brings us back to the original invitation that Jesus gave to his very first followers. And he gives the same invitation to you and me. So one last time, we're going to look at Mark chapter 1, verse 17 together. And for those, just to give us a little more context to understand what's happening here, but Simon and Andrew, these two brothers, they are professional fishermen, and they're fishing on the lake that day. And Jesus just walks right up to them and he speaks these words. He says this to them. He says, "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people." And over the past couple of weeks, we've really been kind of breaking this invitation down phrase by phrase. And so this morning, I want to just focus on this interesting phrase that Jesus uses at the very end here. He says, "I will send them out, or I will send you out to fish for people." Now, that's not really something that we say a whole lot, right? Like, I doubt you've ever asked a friend what they were doing this weekend, and they said, "Oh, I thought maybe Saturday I'd go fishing for people." We just never say that, really, ever. And so what was Jesus talking about? In a lot of ways, I think Jesus is being kind of clever here, because remember, what did Simon and Andrew do? What was their occupation? They were fishermen, right? And so Jesus is kind of having fun with this a little bit. And I think he's saying, I'm going to make fishermen into fishers of men. And, it's okay, I see what you did there, Jesus. And it is kind of clever, but there's more than just wordplay here. Because this phrase, to be a fisher of people, this phrase was also used in the first century to describe the best teachers, the best rabbis of the day. Because these were the rabbis and the teachers who could really, they could just really hook their listeners, right? They had a way of just capturing minds and imaginations with the ways that they could just expound the scriptures and just explain truth, kind of like Jesus, right? Jesus did that. And so Jesus was really telling these guys, he was saying, "I will teach you to do what I do. And then you'll continue the work that I'm doing." And that's really, again, like we talked about last week, that's really the goal of apprenticeship to Jesus, to become like Jesus for the greater purpose of carrying out the mission of Jesus. And a few years later, after this scene on the beach, a few years after this, in a moment right before Jesus was about to leave this world, he left his followers. In fact, he was speaking to a group of his followers, and he left these instructions with them, and he made the mission crystal clear. And this is Matthew 28. Jesus said this. He said, "Go out and train everyone you meet far and near in this way of life, marking them by baptism in the threefold name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Then instruct them in the practice of all I have commanded you." Bottom line, followers of Jesus help others follow Jesus, who help others Follow Jesus. That's the mission. But there's more to what Jesus said here. Jesus wasn't done when he spoke these words. In fact, the very next line is something that is so critical for us to understand. Here's what Jesus said in the very next line. He said, I will be with you as you do this, day after day after day. So we've been handed this mission of Jesus to do with Jesus. So follow me is also an invitation to partnership. And how we do this is by joining God where he's already working in the lives of the people around us. And there's a scene in the life of Jesus where we see this really demonstrated as his way of life. And it happened as he and his apprentices were walking through Samaria one day, and they stopped at about noon at this well that was just outside of a nearby village. And while the apprentices were in the village looking for some food, Jesus was at the well by himself, and this woman walks up to draw water from the well that day. And now there were and it was just the two of them, just Jesus and this woman. And there were some cultural things at play that really could have made this an awkward moment for both of them. Because, first of all, she's a Samaritan, and then she's also a woman. And so in the first century, like a Jewish rabbi would not really associate with a woman in public, but also a Jewish person in general would not associate with a Samaritan. I mean, there was generations and generations of tension and conflict and hatred between those two groups. And so Jesus, being a Jewish rabbi in the first century, does something in this moment that is kind of radical and unheard of. He engages her in a conversation. He just asks her a question. And even she was a little bit thrown by this. She's like, what are you doing? You're not supposed to even talk to me, but he does. And what followed was an exchange between the two of them that made something very clear to Jesus. God was working in this moment and in this woman's life. And I mean, their conversation quickly went from just the challenges and the struggles of daily life to different religious views. And then at one point, Jesus even pointed out some things that were very personal to her life and to her story. And in this moment, it's like her past was brought to light. And along with it, this deep pain that was there and part of her past, and maybe even some shame that came out with it. But in this moment, Jesus didn't flinch at any of this. He just lovingly engaged. He gave her his full attention until finally he shared the truth with her, that he is the Messiah, the one that she was waiting for, the one that she was searching for. And just hearing Jesus say this, and really just in light of the entire conversation, this just blew her mind. And she left the well in a hurry, and she ran back to her village. And this is what she told anyone and everyone who would listen. She said, "Come meet this man who knows everything about me. He told me everything I've ever done." And when the townspeople heard her saying this, they were like, well, we've got to see this. We've got to see what's going on here. And so while that's happening, Jesus is back at the well, and his apprentices have returned, and they brought food and all this, but Jesus isn't hungry because Jesus sees kind of an opportunity for a teaching moment here. And he does something that's really, really interesting, because he starts looking at the fields and the crops that were surrounding them there in this part of Samaria. And he's looking at these fields, and he says something like, wouldn't you say that there's about maybe 4 months before those fields are ready for harvest? And he says that, and then he looks and he sees this group of people walking up the road from the village, and he looks at them, and he says this to his apprentices, and this is John chapter 4, verse 35. He says, "I'm telling you to open your eyes and take a good look at what's right in front of you. These Samaritan fields are ripe. It's harvest time. Not 4 months from now with this group, but right now, it's harvest time." In other words, Jesus is saying, look at the spiritual hunger that's coming up the road, that's coming our way, that's coming to meet me, Jesus is saying. Can you see what's happening here? God has been working. He's been pursuing these people. He's been drawing them to himself. He's been sowing seeds of curiosity and seeds of longing for something more. He's been sowing seeds of hope and even the smallest seeds of faith. And those seeds have blossomed into full-blown fruit that is ripe for the picking. And here's the lesson that Jesus is the point that Jesus is trying to make, and the lesson that he's trying to teach in this moment. And he's sticking with the farming metaphor. And he says this in verse 37. He says, this one sows, that one harvests. Jesus is saying, it's a partnership. It's a partnership. In other words, you don't have to do this alone or on your own, because you've been invited to work with God, arm in arm, joining him where he's already working. And then Jesus takes us even further with this. He drives it home with this in verse 38. He says, I sent you to harvest a field you never worked. Without lifting a finger, you have walked in on a field worked long and hard by others. I sent you, Jesus says. And this sounds very similar to the original invitation that he gave to those fishermen on the beach a few years earlier, right? When he looked at Simon and Peter, he said, I will send you out to fish for people. Here he says, I sent you to harvest a field. Different metaphors, but the same mission. And he invites us to partner with him in that mission, to harvest where he's been planting. Followers of Jesus help others follow Jesus, who help others follow Jesus. It's like this chain reaction of faith that just keeps spreading and multiplying through relationships. And it just goes on generation after generation. It keeps going. And when you think about it, it's very similar to how we as human beings have been biologically designed to multiply through relationship and partnership, really, if you could say. And, I know that it might be a little bit weird to think of it in these terms. And I'm sure this analogy will break down if we go too deep with this, so we're just going to keep it kind of light. But, just thinking of Amanda and I, through our relationship or our partnership, there are 4 more human beings on this planet as a result of that. We multiplied. And now our oldest daughter, Brianna, through her partnership with her husband, Spencer, the same thing is happening. And now, on or around February 1st, we're expecting a grandson. Yeah. Which is pretty cool, right? I'm actually proud of myself for finding a way to work that announcement into the message and keeping it on point. Thank you. Here's the point. The point to this: God invites us to partner with him in the mission of Jesus, to join him where he's working, and to share our faith through relationships, because he wants us to be spiritual parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents and so on. And so when it comes to our faith journey, one thing that is absolutely essential to getting traction is our third core commitment. And here it is: partner in the mission of Jesus together through blessing and leading others, through sharing our faith with others. And again, all of this really hinges on finding where God is working and joining him, right? So how does this work? Like, how do we do this in our real world lives, because that's the trick, isn't it? Well, first of all, we can start by just simply praying for the people in our lives. Right? Just praying for those who live close to us and work next to us, those who go to school with us, and praying for maybe the other parents on our kids' teams, right? Just whoever is in our lives and our lives intersect with, we can start by praying for those people. And when one of those people comes to mind, either while we're praying or maybe just out of the blue, that person comes to mind, it very well could be that that's where God is working. And so we pay attention to that. And then as we engage in conversation with the people in our lives, we listen. We actually listen. And through the listening, through listening to them, we learn what's important to them. We learn what's going on in their world, maybe at work or at home. Maybe it's with their kids or their parents, or just something that's going on. And we listen for traces of hurt or brokenness, or questions that keep coming up again and again. Because when those things begin to surface through conversation, you can be sure that God is working. God is working. And here's another thing that we can do. We can build relationships with them by sharing a meal with them. And I know that's so specific and it's so practical, but do you realize this was how Jesus did it? Right? This was how Jesus did it. In fact, in Luke's biography of Jesus, just looking at that one book of Luke, I mean, there are more than 50 references to food. More than 50 references to food. In fact, one person commented on this and said, just in Luke's gospel, it's like Jesus was always either going to a meal, or he was at a meal, or he was coming from a meal. Jesus loved to eat, right? And so I think probably a lot of us are already more like Jesus than maybe we thought, because we all like to eat, right? But here's what Jesus understood, and I think we all get this, that it's incredible how well we can get to know a person by sharing some good food or maybe even just some great coffee with them. And those are two things that I'm really passionate about, so I'm on board. But then, after we've spent time with them and we're getting to know them, we will discover ways that we can serve them. And it doesn't have to be anything big. It can just be helping to meet a practical need in their life. And we're letting them know that we actually care about them just by serving them. And then the last thing here. And this is where really all of this eventually leads, because it's through these kinds of relationships that we will inevitably have the opportunity to talk about our experience with Jesus and to tell them the difference that he's made in our lives. Not a theological discourse, right? Not some apologetic proof for the existence of God. Just your experience, your story. And it won't be forced, and it won't be coercive, and it won't be manipulative. It'll be natural. It'll be conversational. It'll be relational. And so it's through praying for them and listening to them and eating with them and serving them and sharing your story with them. This is how we can find where God is working and partner with him in his mission to bring everyone closer to God through Jesus. You know, the woman that met Jesus at the well that day, she didn't know a whole lot of theology, but she just knew Jesus, right? And maybe only for a minute. But it was enough for her to run back to her village and tell her neighbors her story. And as we look a little bit further, a few verses later, we see the outcome of that. It says that many of the Samaritans from that village committed themselves to Jesus because of the woman's witness. God was working, and she joined. She joined him. So here's the invitation for us this morning. Our next step in response to this. Do one thing to help you find where God is working and join him. Just one thing. One thing that you can do this week. In fact, maybe it's one thing that you can start doing each day this week to find where God is working and then join him. So, like we've done the past couple of weeks, I wanted to carve out just a few minutes as part of our time together this morning to just do a little self-reflection. And so we've got another survey. This is a brand new survey. It's just 5 questions, and it's in the seat pockets in front of you, where it should be. And I would invite you to take that out right now. This is really just an opportunity for you to reflect on and just evaluate where you are in your own faith journey. But as we work through this, I wonder if some additional next steps for you might begin to emerge. And so go ahead and look at this. And again, this is anonymous. You don't need to put your name on this unless you think it would be helpful for us to follow up with you and get a hold of you, but otherwise leave it completely anonymous. But first question here. It's just, I am regularly praying for someone specific who doesn't know God. And then the next question. I am building a relationship with someone who doesn't go to church. Spending time with them, listening to them, maybe eating with them, that sort of thing. And then the third question here. I am finding ways to meet practical needs in my community. Fourth question here. I can share my story within God's story with confidence. And then the last question there really is just specific to the international ministry, your experience with that, if you have any. And one of the ways that we partner with God in the work that he's doing all over the world is that we send teams to places like Haiti, as we've done over the years, and to places like Kenya, as we've done as recently as last year. And so just curious about your experience with that, and maybe that's something you've been a part of. But as you look through this survey, and wherever you checked a no, that could be your next step. Maybe that's the one thing that you can do to find where God is working and then join him. Maybe it looks like praying for somebody and just committing. I'm going to pray each day this coming week, and I'm just going to pray that God would open a door, and I'm just going to pray for someone specifically. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's spending a little time with a neighbor just listening. Maybe it's opening your home to some friends or some coworkers or neighbors to come in and share a meal with you, or just meeting someone for coffee. Maybe it's serving a practical need that you've encountered somewhere in your community. Whatever that looks like, maybe that's your next step, the one thing that you can do to find where God is working and join him. So as we wind down and as we wrap this thing up, and really I'm thinking just bringing this entire series to a close this morning, I want to ask you one more question. Are you in a season right now of just feeling stuck in your faith journey? Maybe you've even used that phrase. I just can't get any traction. It's interesting, this idea of traction, just in the literal sense, like if we're looking at just our cars or maybe our trucks as an example. Traction always requires a combination of three things: the right tires on the right surface with the right amount of power. Right? And really, when we have the right combination of those three things, this is what helps us achieve traction. And given the right equipment, that kind of traction can drive us through pretty much any kind of terrain. Like we've seen the videos of those off-roaders and that sort of thing. It's pretty awesome what we can achieve with the right kind of traction. And this is really where I've been going over these past 3 weeks, and really where all of this is coming together for us, because we pursue Jesus together. Because relationships are like the tread on our tires. And we practice the way of Jesus together, because the Jesus way of life is like the pavement that brings us closer to God. And we partner in the mission of Jesus together, because his mission is like the engine that's driving all four wheels. And when we orient our lives around all three of these core commitments, that's when we'll begin to achieve and get the traction that we need to get us out of those ruts, to get us unstuck, and to drive our faith forward. Let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you for this beautiful invitation, this incredible invitation to follow you, to have a relationship with you, to become more like you, and to even join you in this mission of bringing everyone closer to God. Lord, thank you for this. Thank you for including us. And Father, we ask right now that as we go from here, that you would just help us, Lord, to see where you are working. Open our eyes, open our hearts, open our minds, Lord, to help us see where you're working, that we could join you. God, would you give us the courage we need to step into it? We love you, Jesus. We pray this in your name. Amen. All right, a couple more minutes before I send you out of here, but just I want to remind you of a couple of things. First of all, as it is Communion Weekend, that means it's also our Benevolence Fund offering, which is something we do at the end of the services just once a month. And this fund is what allows us to come alongside some folks within our community, within our family here at Cypress, who are just in a season of need. And so if you want to give to that, there are going to be some folks standing at the doors, and you can leave your contributions there. And then I want to remind you, for anyone who wants to step in and sponsor a a child in Haiti. You can do that on the patio as you leave. Just stop and talk to Tom and Selena Dottel. I believe they're out there and they'd love to get you started with that. And then I want to remind you to sign up for a small group, because next weekend is the kickoff of our new season, our fall season of small groups here at Cypress. And we're really excited about this. And I want to say just a little bit about the new series that we're going to kick off next Sunday. It's called What Our World Needs Now. And so starting next Sunday, we're going to begin a series of conversations where we're just going to dive into some things that I believe our world truly needs. But these are things that we're not going to hear in any campaign speeches. They're not on any politician's agenda, I promise you. But these are things that can really transform our communities, starting with us and starting with our homes. And so, because what our world really needs now is love, sweet love. Wasn't there a song about that, right? Does anybody know who sang that song? Who was it? You might be right. I don't know. I was looking for it between services and I couldn't figure it out. But anyway, just a fun little trivia fact. But what our world really needs now are things like love and joy and peace and kindness and those sorts of things, because truly that's what's going to change our world. And so we want to begin those conversations. And starting next week, we're really encouraging everyone to be with us here on Sunday mornings for the teaching, but then to be a part of a small group throughout the week where we can engage in life-on-life relationships, and we can take this even further with application and how we live this out in our personal lives. So I would encourage you to get signed up for a small group today. You can do that on the patio, at the tent, or you can do it on our website. So thank you, Cypress. That's all I have for you. Have a beautiful Labor Day, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Days I pray for